The tension between the protagonist and the mini-dragon escalated as the battlefield became increasingly chaotic. The dragon, with a sinister glint in its eyes, urged him once more, hand over control. It was a simple offer. If he allowed the dragon to take over, it would eliminate the monstrous bird without hesitation. But the protagonist hesitated. The words unsettled him. The mini-dragon, growing impatient, clarified that the body originally belonged to it. Ever since it had been sealed within him, it had been forced into a powerless state. But now, it could feel the energy flowing through him. The earlier jump had been proof. Its power was still intact. It had lent that strength to the protagonist, allowing him to survive the fall. Without it, he would have plummeted to his death. However, there was no time to dwell on the details. The monstrous bird was relentless, continuing its pursuit with unwavering aggression. The ground shook under the force of its attacks as the protagonist barely managed to evade its strikes. The dragon's voice cut through the chaos, demanding urgency. If he didn't make a decision soon, he would die. Yet, even as he ran, the protagonist's mind remained firm. Giving control to the strongest species, that was absurd. He tightened his grip on the small dragon in his hands, glaring at it with unwavering resolve. There was no way he would allow such a thing to happen. He hadn't forgotten what the dragon had done in the past, the destruction it had caused at Hachi School. Before he could dwell on the thought, disaster struck. A searing blast of energy erupted from the monster's mouth, the heat searing the air as it raced toward him. The protagonist barely managed to dodge in time, the sheer force of the attack sending shockwaves across the battlefield. His heart pounded wildly in his chest. That had been close, too close. The monstrous bird had no hesitation, no restraint. It was going to obliterate him without a second thought. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air. The protagonist's breath caught as his eyes darted toward the source. A woman, still in a wheelchair, had not managed to evacuate in time. She was trapped, completely exposed to the ongoing battle. A sinking feeling settled in his chest. This wasn't just about him anymore. If she was caught in the crossfire, she wouldn't survive. The monstrous bird, sensing weakness, changed course. Its massive wings flared as it shifted its attention toward the helpless woman. Panic surged through the protagonist. He had gotten distracted for just a moment, and now someone's life was on the line. Gritting his teeth, he cursed the creature and shouted, trying to divert its attention back to himself. He had no idea if his voice alone would be enough, but he had to try. The mini-dragon, now seething with frustration, berated him for his recklessness. This was unnecessary. He was putting himself at risk again when he could have simply handed over his body and let the dragon handle it. Yet, despite its scolding, the protagonist refused to back down. The realization hit him like a brick. If his body truly was made from the strongest species, then he should have the power to fight back. Clenching his fist, he made his decision. He charged toward the monstrous bird and delivered a punch with all his strength, and then nothing. The impact was meaningless. The bird barely reacted, its body completely unfazed. The protagonist staggered back in disbelief. How could that be? He had expected at least some effect, but it was as if he had punched solid stone. The mini-dragon let out a sharp, irritated sigh. This was exactly what it had warned him about. Without its will, the protagonist was nothing more than a regular human. Strength alone wasn't enough. Power without direction was meaningless. But there was no time for explanations. The bird monster's energy flared once again, signaling another attack. A second atomic breath was forming, its glow illuminating the battlefield with a deadly radiance. The protagonist's pulse quickened. This was bad. This time, there was no way he could dodge. The mini-dragon's voice took on a new level of seriousness. One last time, it demanded an answer. If the protagonist surrendered control, the dragon would take care of the monster. Otherwise, everything in the hospital, everyone still inside, would be wiped out in an instant. The attack was moments away from being unleashed. The dragon shouted in frustration, urging him to hurry up. There was no time left. If he hesitated any longer, it would be too late. But instead of conceding, the protagonist did something unexpected. Grabbing the mini-dragon tightly in both hands, he pressed its face against his palms. With unwavering determination, he called out the dragon's title mockingly. The reason this entire situation had happened in the first place was because of it. It had drawn the monster here. It had caused all this chaos. And now it wanted to take his body for its own gain. He wasn't going to let that happen. Instead, he was going to use the dragon's power on his terms. The monster's attack reached its peak. A blinding surge of energy erupted from its beak, hurtling toward them with catastrophic force. The mini-dragon, utterly exasperated, screamed in disbelief. The protagonist had lost his mind. If he wasn't careful, they were all going to be annihilated. Yet even as destruction loomed over them, the protagonist stood firm. As the battle raged on, the protagonist stood his ground, a smirk forming on his face despite the overwhelming danger. He had pushed himself to the absolute limit, and yet the mini-dragon, however, had no intention of perishing alongside a stubborn fool. Panic surged through it as the monstrous bird's devastating attack inched closer. It screamed in frustration, realizing that if it didn't act, they would both be incinerated. With no other choice, it ordered the protagonist to extend his right hand. Just this once, it would lend him its power, but only a little. Without hesitation, the mini-dragon dove into the black void that had formed in the protagonist's palm. The moment it disappeared, a rush of energy unlike anything he had ever felt surged through him. It started deep in his core, welling up from the pit of his stomach and spreading through his limbs like fire coursing through his veins. This was raw power, pure and untamed. For the first time, he truly felt it. With newfound resolve, he aimed his attack skyward, preparing to unleash everything at just the right moment. The system, responding to the surge of energy, displayed a warning. It announced the controlled release of power from the strongest species, an infinitesimally small fraction, barely 0.0001% of its full potential. Yet, even that minuscule amount was overwhelming. As he clenched his fist, a blinding blue atomic force erupted from his fist, surging forth with devastating intensity. The collision was inevitable. The bird monster had already unleashed its own energy blast. Two incomprehensible forces colliding in an instant, creating a violent explosion that shattered the night sky. The protagonist's power, now fully infused with the will of the strongest species, overwhelmed the monstrous bird's attack entirely. A second later, his blue atomic blast surged forward, smashing into the creature with unstoppable force. The impact was catastrophic. The monstrous bird barely had time to react before it was consumed by the devastating energy. Its massive form was incinerated in an instant, reduced to nothing more than ash in the wind. A single strike, one attack, had obliterated an extraterrestrial life form of unimaginable power. A stunned silence followed. The battlefield, which had moments ago been filled with deafening chaos, now stood eerily quiet. From a distance, the woman in the wheelchair had witnessed everything. She had watched in awe as the monstrous being had been erased from existence, leaving nothing behind. A soft smile formed on her lips. The system, ever precise, immediately registered the change. It announced the termination of the limited power release, restoring the protagonist to his normal state. The overwhelming energy that had filled him moments ago vanished, leaving behind only exhaustion. The protagonist, still reeling from the experience, could hardly believe what had just happened. But before he could dwell on it any longer, his body gave in. The strain of wielding such immense energy took its toll. His vision blurred, and his strength abandoned him. His knees buckled, and before he could catch himself, he collapsed. The woman, seeing him fall, called out his name in alarm. Without hesitation, she rushed toward him. As she reached his unconscious form, her gaze flickered toward the lifeless remains of the monstrous bird. Confusion filled her mind. Something wasn't right. She recognized that creature. She had seen it before. It was the same extraterrestrial being, Eva, from earlier. But how? How had it been taken down so effortlessly? Her thoughts raced. And then, realization struck her like a thunderbolt. Kuraboshi, this boy, wasn't supposed to have any abilities. He wasn't supposed to possess an alpha-level power. He was meant to be ordinary. And yet, what she had just witnessed proved otherwise. This child was something entirely different.